Elijah, Naaman, and Josiah. The story of Elijah. The first three kings in Israel were Saul, David, and then Solomon. 50 years after Solomon's death, in the year 873 BC, Ahab was king. And there was no king worse than Ahab. He married a witch and set up an altar to worship Baal. Ahab was furious when Elijah came to him proclaiming a judgment of drought in the land. The Lord told Elijah to escape to a brook near the river Jordan. Elijah was alone without any food when the Lord spoke. "I have commanded that the ravens feed you." However, with no rain, soon Elijah was without water. So God told Elijah to go to a town where he had commanded a widow to take care of him. Elijah saw the widow and said, "Please fetch me a drink and some food." The woman replied, "I have enough for one meal, and then my son and I will die." Elijah said, "First let me eat, for the Lord has said that you will have flour and oil until the day the rain comes." Elijah stayed with the woman for about 3 years, and the flour and oil never ran out. However, the widow's son died, and she said to Elijah, "Have you come here to remind me of my sins and kill my son? Give me the boy." Then he asked the Lord, "Have you killed the woman's son?" Elijah then prayed for the child, and the boy came back to life. The mother said, "Now I truly know that you are a man of God." Then the Lord spoke to Elijah, "Go to King Ahab, and then I will send rain." After meeting with Elijah, the governor then went to the king to make an appointment. But when Elijah appeared, the king was furious, saying, "You are the one who has caused this drought in Israel." Elijah responded, "Tell all the people of Israel, the prophets of Baal, and the witches who eat at your wife's dinner table to gather at Mount Carmel." Then Elijah spoke to the people, "If the Lord is God, then follow him. If Baal is God, then follow him." As the prophets called to Baal, Elijah said, "We will sacrifice, then call on God for fire, and the God who answers with fire, he is God." In the evening, Elijah repaired the altar of the Lord. After digging a trench, Elijah said, "Go and fetch 4 barrels of water." They poured the water over the sacrifice and then filled the trench. Elijah began to pray, "Lord, let it be known this day that you are the God of Israel." Immediately, the fire of the Lord burnt up the sacrifice. The people fell on their faces and said, "The Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God." Then Elijah took his servant and went to the top of Mount Carmel to pray. 6 times Elijah sent the servant to see if rain was coming. The 7th time the servant returned and said, "There is a very small cloud coming from the sea." Elijah told the servant, "Tell Ahab to prepare his chariot, or the rain will stop him." Ahab rode his chariot as fast as he could, but he was outrun by Elijah. 850 years before Christ, Elijah passed on his mantle to his servant Elisha, and Elijah was taken to heaven in a whirlwind. At the same time as Elisha lived a man called Naaman. Naaman had leprosy and was the captain of the Syrian army. Naaman's Israelite servant said, "If Naaman would visit the prophet of God in Israel, he would be healed." The king sent a servant to Naaman, saying, "Go, and I will write a letter to the king of Israel." So Naaman set off with presents of silver, gold, and clothing. The king of Israel was furious. "Am I God that I can heal a man of leprosy?" Naaman was given this message by Elisha's servant, "Wash in the river Jordan 7 times, and you will be healed." But because Elisha didn't come out, Naaman was angry. "There are rivers elsewhere where I can wash, that are cleaner than the rivers of Israel." His servant spoke, "If the prophet wanted you to do something big, would you have done it?" After calming down, Naaman went to the river and washed 6 times, and he was still a leper. Then he washed the 7th time, and his flesh became as pure as a child's. Naaman raced back to the house of Elisha with an offering of thanks. But Elisha would not accept a gift. However, Elisha's servant ran after Naaman, saying, "My master will accept some silver and some clothes for 2 guests." So Naaman granted his request. Then Elisha's servant hid the silver and clothes. Elisha said to the servant, "This is not a time to receive gifts. The leprosy that Naaman had shall be on you." And Elisha's servant went out a leper. Ever since the Lord took the kingdom from Solomon, there was the kingdom of Judah in the south and the kingdom of Israel in the north. 790 years before Christ, war broke out between Judah and Israel. There are many kings recorded in the Bible during this period, and it was around the time of 750 to 700 BC that Amos, Hosea, Isaiah, and Micah began to prophesy against Israel's disobedience, the coming destruction of Jerusalem, and the coming of the Messiah. This takes us through to the year 643 BC, when Ammon was the king over Judah. Ammon was a wicked king, and had turned away from the living God to worship idols and images. He was king from the age of 22 to 25, when he was murdered by his servants. Ammon had a young son called Josiah. In the year 640 BC, the people made 8-year-old Josiah their king. When Josiah was 20, he began to get rid of the idols from the land. 2 years later, he decided to refurbish Solomon's temple. Plans were drawn and workmen were employed. Money was collected to pay the carpenters and stonemasons. In the temple they found the book of the law. "Your Majesty, we have discovered a book in the temple." Josiah asked them to read it. Josiah responded, "This is terrible that we haven't kept the law of the Lord. His anger against us must be great." A prophetess who lived in Jerusalem said, "The Lord God of Israel says, because the king has humbled himself, I will not punish the people during his lifetime." King Josiah stood in the temple and read the law to all of the people of Jerusalem. Then everyone agreed to keep the commandments of God. Every image, idol, and altar used to worship other gods was destroyed. King Josiah turned the hearts of the people back to the Lord. Josiah reigned for 31 years in Jerusalem between 640 and 609 BC. During this time, Zephaniah prophesied the total destruction of Jerusalem and the dispersion of its inhabitants. In 628 BC, Jeremiah began to prophesy. In chapter 25, he prophesies very clearly there is a 70-year captivity just about to take place. Also, Nahum in 612 prophesied the destruction of Nineveh. 2 years after Josiah's reign as king, in 607, Habakkuk began to prophesy concerning the destruction of Jerusalem. 23 years after Josiah's reign, Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, besieged Jerusalem. On August the 14th, 586 years before Christ, the total destruction of Jerusalem and the temple began, as prophesied by the prophets.